Hey guys, tonight we journey back in time, but not to any old corner of history. No battles, no kings, no shouting generals on horseback. No, tonight you're on foot. The moon is high over a vast stretch of sand. Stars blink above like pinholes in a black curtain, and you're trudging along the silk routes, one slow, sleepy step at a time. You're wrapped in layers of cloth, because even though the desert scorches by day, the nights are a chilled hush of wind and whispers. Your boots crunch on ancient gravel. Somewhere to your left, a camel grunts its disapproval at everything. And then you hear it a soft mew. Not far ahead, at the edge of a flickering fire, a small striped cat curls on a merchant's lap. It blinks at you lazily, and you can't help but wonder, what is it doing here? Welcome to the ancient ends of the Silk Road, filled with tired traders, dusty coin pouches, warm bread, and cats. So many cats, you probably won't survive this trek without one on your shoulder. Not because they're magical, though some people did believe that, but because these cats are part of the road itself. They've scratched out a spot in history just as surely as any emperor or explorer. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing where everyone is curling up for sleep. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your first stop is somewhere west of Unwind, that misty gateway town where China brushes the edge of desert wilderness. The winds here carry dust from half a continent away, and the only buildings that truly stand the test of time are the caravans or thick-walled inns, spaced out like life rafts across the sandy sea. You step inside one, brushing the grit from your robe. It smells like spiced lentils, old wool, and faintly of animal fur. A sleepy-eyed man behind a clay counter glances up and nods, and there right beside him is a sleek gray cat, tail twitching like it's judging your entire existence, which, to be fair, it might be. These inns weren't just places to rest. They were cultural meltdowns in miniature. You could hear Arabic, Turkic, Persian, Mandarin, and languages that barely survived into the footnotes of history. Traders shared food, swapped stories, and always coexisted with cats, not accidentally, not incidentally. These creatures were expected, even necessary. You head toward the back, where the sleeping platforms are stacked with cushions, and a black and white cat sprawls in the warmest corner. No one moves it, a grumpy trader mutters. That one caught 5 mice last week. She's earned her spot. Cats in these caravan stops were more than pest control, they were tradition. Passed along not through formal contracts, but through memory. One weary traveler might say to another, "You like the inn past the river. The soup's hot, the beds don't creak, and there's a marmalade cat who keeps the storeroom clean." And the cats, they didn't just stay at one inn. They hitched rides with caravans, changing routes like freelance security consultants. One day in Samarkand, next week in Bach, maybe down through Kashgar before winter. They came. They napped. They conquered. Historians still argue whether these feline companions were truly seen as part of the workforce, or if they simply existed in a liminal space neither pet nor wild, but a creature allowed. Some scrolls refer to cats in ledgers, others don't mention them at all, which, let's be honest, feels exactly like something a cat would arrange. Unnoticed, unbothered, and still getting dinner. You set your pack down and stretch your legs. Another traveler, sharpening a curved blade, looks up and says, "Don't mind that one," nodding toward a fuzzy tabby grooming itself on the ledge. He follows the spice caravans, likes the smell of cumin. Another joked out maybe dot, but also, you kind of believe it. A boy brings you tea milky, hot, and so sweet it could resurrect the dead and sits nearby, scratching behind a purring cat's ears. My uncle says if a cat curls up near your boots, you'll sleep safe tonight, he says seriously. They know where danger sleeps. You nod, You pretend you're not charmed. The fire crackles lower. Someone begins plucking a two-string lute outside. The wind hisses like it's searching for someone it lost. Inside, cats curl in corners, atop sacks of flour, along window sills, on the folded legs of snoring merchants. There's a rhythm here, a soft, shared understanding that these creatures belong, that a warm inn is better with a few whiskers. A Persian rug merchant tells you eyes already half closed, that he once stayed in an inn without cats, woke up to a rat chewing through my belts. Never again. You laugh softly, then ask him if he's joking. He doesn't answer. He's already asleep. A ginger cat climbs up beside him, needs the blanket, and purrs. You lean back, the exhaustion of the road finally catching up with you. The stars are invisible now, hidden behind thick mud brick and fading lamplight. But you feel them out there, and you feel the cats, dozens of them, each a sliver of soft purpose in the ever-turning wheel of commerce, comfort, and quiet companionship. The road stretches ahead of you still, but tonight, in this inn, under the watchful gaze of creatures that somehow survived pharaohs, floods, plagues, and poetry, you rest and you sleep. You wake before dawn, not because someone calls you, but because something shifts, a soft thump, a sudden pitter-patter across the clay floor. You blink one eye open just in time to see a cat disappear into the storeroom, tail flicking like it owns the place, which, judging by last night's stories, it probably does. You're sore in the way that only travelers are, tired in your feet, your shoulders, even your ears. But the quiet warmth of the inn still wraps around you like an old coat. There's a pot of something hot simmering in the kitchen, a few figures stirring under blankets, and several cats already fully awake and doing their morning patrols, stretching, yawning, judging. You wander outside, blinking into the gray-blue sky. The stars are gone. The desert is silent. But ahead across another day's walk or two is another stop, another inn, another place. You're told, where cats wait at the doorway like silent greeters. And this one is famous. You arrive at the next caravanserai near sunset. The building rises from the landscape like it's grown out of the sand itself, thick stone walls, worn smooth at the corners, and a low arch painted with sun symbols. There's a mosaic of a lion above the door. Except the lion has suspiciously feline features and appears to be licking its paw. The innkeeper is waiting, lounging on a stool that creaks dangerously. His robe is rumpled, his beard is full of breadcrumbs, and he barely looks up when he says, "Rooms are full. Unless you're traveling with a cat." You blink. He glances up. "Do you have a cat?" You shake your head slowly. He sighs. "Fine. But you're sharing with 3 merchants and 1 very territorial calico." This, as it turns out, is one of the oldest inns along this stretch of road. And its reputation isn't for the stew or the shelter. It's for the cats, dozens of them, possibly more than the guests. Cats sleeping on benches, cats sunning themselves on the parapet. One sitting on a sack of salt like it's guarding a throne, another delicately dipping its paw into a bowl of oil. There are cats in the rafters, cats on window ledges, cats curled up beside the communal hearth like little furry loaves of bread. This isn't a fluke. This is the norm here. The innkeeper finally explains between bites of stale bread. Always had cats. Since my grandfather's time. And before him. And before that. We don't chase them off, they keep the mice out of the grain, the snakes out of the latrine, and the spirits off the roof. Spirits, you raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. Some say cats can see what we can't. Some say they guard us from the evil eye. Others just like how warm they are. Cats had long shared space with humans. Sure, but here along the silk routes, they became something more. Trusted, needed, expected. Historians still argue whether these early cat inns were actually part of a coordinated effort to maintain trade hygiene or just happy accidents born of practicality. Some caravan records mention mouse control measures. Others show sudden outbreaks of disease in inns without cats. And then there are the scrolls that show tiny cat-shaped ink stamps next to inspection notes, which could either be official marks or ancient doodles. Either way, cats became part of the brand. You explore the courtyard before dinner and notice that many of the cats seem to know the layout better than the staff. One leads a kitten up a staircase that no guest ever uses. Another squeezes through a loose tile in the storeroom wall. When you mention this to the cook, she laughs. They find their own places, she says, dusting flour from her apron. Sometimes I think this whole inn is built around them. She might not be wrong. One worn mural on the dining hall wall shows travelers arriving, dusty and bowed under heavy loads. And right in the center, a fat orange cat being carried like royalty in a sling. You stare at it, wondering if that's supposed to be a joke. But the brush strokes are serious, reverent even. Like someone wanted that moment preserved. You ask the innkeeper if the cats ever leave. He looks surprised. Why would they? Fair question. Here, they're part of the ecosystem. There's a rhythm to it. Humans come and go. Camels spit and stomp. Coins clink and clatter, and the cats simply stay. Generations of them, born under these same tiled roofs, growing up beneath the same tapestries, learning the same shortcuts through the same hallways. Later, at supper, a trader from the west tells a story with a gleam in his eye. They say the first caravanserai were built around cat paths. He whispers, not roads, not trade winds, cat trails. The merchants just followed where the cats already knew it was safe. You can't tell if he's serious, but then again, history is run on stranger fuel. That night, your sleeping space is cramped. A wool merchant snores like thunder. A young apprentice mutters in his dreams. And the calico cat, she takes up the prime spot on the pillow and growls. When you try to move her, you give up. She wins. But as your eyes close and your breath evens out, you realize there's something calming about the presence of so many cats. Their slow movements, their deep, rumbling purrs, the way they blink at the world like nothing in it can surprise them anymore. You drift off to sleep to the sound of a paw batting gently at a loose bead on your satchel. The fire dies down. A wind passes outside, but the thick stone walls hold steady, and the cats remain, watching, curling, dreaming their silent, secret kid dreams. Morning breaks over the inn with the faint sound of someone shuffling dates into a basket, and the louder sound of a rooster, who is clearly overestimating his importance. You stretch, careful not to disturb the calico who's still hogging the pillow. She's staring at you now, not affectionately, not resentfully, just aware that you exist, which is probably the highest compliment you're getting today. As you gather your things and prepare to set off, a young stable hand gives you a serious warning. Keep your food tightly wrapped today. Some of the cats follow travelers. They're clever. They'll unzip your pack if you let them. You nod, not entirely sure if that's true. But after yesterday, you're not taking chances. The road stretches forward in gentle curves, dotted with scrubby bushes and, bizarrely, a half-buried statue of a goat with wings. Don't ask, no one has a good answer. By midday, the sun is relentless, and you take shelter in the shade of a rock outcrop, only to find the cat already there. Sleek and black, it gives you a look that clearly says my spot. You move 3 feet to the left. But as the miles fall behind you and the next stop comes into view, you begin to understand the deeper reason why cats became permanent fixtures in this harsh and ever-changing landscape. Inside the next caravanserai, a low, wide structure built around a central courtyard, you see it clearly. 3 cats, perched like sentinels along the edge of a grain storage room. Their eyes track everything. Their tails flick and sink. And on the wall beside them, a faded warning painted in red. Guard the stores well. Rats bring death. In an age when a single sick rat could destroy a shipment of silks, infect a caravan, or worse, bring plague from one city to the next. These little furballs weren't just cute distractions. They were vital. They saved lives. Historians still argue whether the cat populations in these inns were maintained intentionally, some sort of rudimentary, decentralized pest control system, or whether the cats simply took advantage of the free food and warmth. But one thing is clear. Their presence made things better, cleaner, safer, less squeaky. You chat with an older man who's cleaning out saddlebags. He gestures toward a ginger tomcat sunbathing near the camels. That one saved my bolts of silk last season. Chewed through a rat that got bold. I named him Cinnamon. Don't tell him that though. He thinks his name is Prince. You don't argue. The cat does have a rather imperious expression. And it isn't just about the grain. Cats along the silk routes protected everything from manuscripts to medicines. In an age before sealed containers and vacuum storage, one hole chewed through a scroll pouch could mean the loss of irreplaceable knowledge. A single rodent gnawing on rare herbs might ruin a healer's chances of helping anyone on the road. You pass by a caravan unloading goods in the shade. Among the goods, dried fruits, carved ornaments, folded maps. And perched right atop the entire pile, a sleepy cat who stretches so hard it falls off the crate. No one laughs. The owner simply says, he's guarding it, then adds, in his own way. One scholar you meet near the well recounts a story he read in an old Persian medical text. There's a line, he says, about how mice nibbling the corners of a medicinal scroll once resulted in a miscopied formula and the wrong dosage. He lowers his voice dramatically. After that, the doctor kept the cat inside the apothecary at all times. Practicality shaped myth, and myth reinforced behavior. It's easy to see how the humble Mauser was elevated, sometimes literally, to the status of protector. In one guest room, painted high up near the ceiling, is a fresco of a cat in mid-pounce, facing off against what looks like a rat, or possibly a tiny demon. It's hard to tell. The details have faded, but the message is clear. The cat is the hero. The villain, whatever it is, gets the claws. And still today, historians debate whether the prevalence of cats at these inns was rooted in disease prevention, some kind of pre-scientific instinct for biosecurity, or if it was simply an example of a useful behavior being rewarded until it became ritual. You find yourself hoping it's both. The world works better when practicality and superstition overlap, especially when it results in free rodent patrol later. While sitting on a low bench in the courtyard, you see one of the cats chasing something across the tiles. Not a rat this time, just a leaf. She skids, stumbles, and knocks over a jug of water. A young porter sighs and mops it up with practiced resignation. They break things sometimes, he admits, but fewer than the mice. That evening, as the lamps are lit and smoke curls from the cook fires, the cats settle into their preferred spots, above the doorways, along the stone benches, inside baskets, under carts. One curls up next to your pack like it belongs to her, and maybe it does. You sip a bowl of spiced milk offered by an old woman who calls herself simply Auntie. She's watching a cat bat at her yarn while she knits, completely unbothered. My great-grandmother said cats see trouble before it arrives. She says, that's why we keep them close. You'll notice they always sit near the door. And when you look, you do notice 3 cats, 3 different doors, all facing outward, as if waiting. You leave early the next morning, the cold air clinging to your clothes like a whisper. Your pack is slightly heavier, probably from someone slipping an extra dried apricot, or possibly from the tabby kitten that attempted to sneak inside. You gently nudge it back out, and it gives you a look of such betrayal you almost reconsider. The road east today is lined with low hills and quiet thorn trees. A few birds scatter ahead of your steps. Somewhere behind you, a cart groans under its load of dyed fabrics, and ahead just over the next ridge is a market town bustling with sound, smell, and life. You pass under its stone gate by mid-morning, and immediately you're swallowed by noise. Street vendors hawk spiced nuts, figs, and camel bells. A musician plucks a stringed instrument that looks suspiciously like it's held together by pure hope. But even here, with all this motion and shouting, something catches your attention. A long, narrow alley to the left, quiet and filled with cats, sunlight slants between the buildings, casting long golden amber stripes over feline fur. A sleek Siamese lounges on a windowsill. A pair of scruffy kittens wrestle beneath a basket of pomegranates. At least one cat appears to be sleeping inside a shoe. You ask a spice seller, "Why are there so many cats here?" He shrugs and says, "Why not? Fair enough." But as you wander through the town, you start noticing something else. Cats are everywhere, and not just physically, but in language. A merchant describing a clever business rival calls him as tricky as a silk cat. A local kid warns you not to trust a particular cart driver, saying he smiles like a wet cat. Another refers to her scarf as soft as temple whiskers. Cats have become metaphor. Not just animals, but idioms, analogies, punchlines. You find yourself in a shaded courtyard where a poet is reciting verses in Persian. You don't catch every word, but you hear the phrase "moon-eyed Mauser" and "tale of mercy" and purr between the silences. The crowd nods appreciatively. Someone snaps their fingers softly. A cat jumps onto the low wall nearby and starts grooming itself mid-poem, completely unfazed by art or applause. Later, while sipping a thick date drink from a brass cup, you meet a traveling storyteller from Shiraz. His robe is patched, and he wears a single gold earring shaped like a curled cat. He grins and says, "In my country, cats are wiser than kings." And more consistent, he tells you of ancient Persian texts where cats feature as divine judges, silent messengers, or even jealous rivals. One famous line describes a philosopher distracted mid-debate by a cat who stared at him until he forgot what he was saying. The cat, the writer concluded, had already won the argument. Historians still argue whether this feline literary reverence was symbolic cats as stand-ins for beauty, stealth, or fate, or whether it reflected a society where the animals themselves held tangible roles in daily life. Scrolls from the region often depict cats in the margins, casually lounging near scribes and students, as if their presence was too mundane to explain and too important to leave out. Even street slang took on feline twists in some dialects along the Silk Road. To say someone had cat's fingers meant they were a skilled thief or tailor. Context was everything. To eat like a cat meant daintily and with suspicion. To sleep like temple cats implied complete and total trust in one's safety. You overhear the traders arguing about the weight of a bolt of silk. One accuses the other of adding cat fluff to the scales. It sounds like an insult. It might be a compliment. Either way, the nearby kid doesn't seem bothered. As the sun dips lower and the market begins to close, you find a stall selling embroidered sashes. One pattern repeats in blues and greens, winding roads, curved rooftops, and little silver cat silhouettes worked in fine thread. The vendor smiles when you ask about it. "Oh, those are good luck," she says. "Travelers buy them for protection. The cats see what's ahead." A common belief, a clever marketing angle, historians still argue. You pass a tea shop where a woman swats a cat off her lap with a soft cloth and says, "He knows I'm leaving tomorrow. He always acts like this before a goodbye." There's something undeniably strange about how present cats are not just as animals, but as characters in the life of the city. They weave in and out of shops like they own shares. One climbs onto a prayer mat during dusk prayers. No one moves it. The imam pauses, smiles, then carries on. You take a slow walk toward the edge of town as the last orange light brushes the rooftops. A cat walks beside you for a while, tail held high, occasionally glancing at you like it's making sure you're still following. Eventually, it peels off into a narrow crack in a wall and vanishes, and you continue, mindful of metaphors, whispers of poetry, and the soft flick of tails beneath a fading sky. By dawn, the streets behind you have quieted, leaving only the rustle of wind through dry grasses and the creak of your pack straps. Ahead lies the open desert again, but your mind still lingers on the poetry, the embroidered cat sashes, the slang that curled around feline metaphors like yarn. You don't get far before you fall in with another small caravan through donkeys to carts, and a very old sailor walking on dry land like he still expects waves underfoot. He's humming to himself, a tune with no words, and you nod hello. He nods back. You ever hear how cats got here? From Egypt, he asks. You shake your head. You're not even sure how he got here from Egypt. Well, he says, clearly delighted, they hitched rides with the grain ships, eastbound and smug. He squints toward the horizon. Sacred animals in one land, stowaways in another. That's how it always goes. He goes on to explain between sips from a cracked water skin in Egypt, cats were revered to the point of religious iconography. Bastet, the goddess with a feline head, presided over protection and fertility. Among other things, in temples along the Nile, cats were fed, groomed, even mummified. And when trade ships began skimming eastward across the Red Sea, the cats came. To not officially, of course, he adds. They'd sneak aboard for the fish. The crews let him stay for the rats. Mutual benefit, ancient maritime union, you could say. Historians still argue whether the feline spread eastward was planned perhaps by priests, hoping to expand the sacred cult, or purely incidental. The result of hungry cats choosing boats over pyramids. The one thing is certain, by the time ships docked in southern Arabia, or farther still into Persia and India, cats were already part of the cargo. Soft, whiskered contraband, see. The sailor says, lowering his voice. Some say the cats never forgot where they came from. That's why they walk around like they own everything. You both look at a nearby kitten sprawled over a trader's sandal like it invented footwear. See what I mean? The journey continues through an old river valley, where palm trees dot the landscape, and ruined ziggurats peek from the ground like half-buried teeth. You stop for lunch under one such ruin, and the sailor points to the carvings' weather-worn reliefs showing goats, serpents, and, unmistakably, a slender cat with its tail curled around a moon-shaped bowl. Mesopotamians, he grunts, knew what was up, indeed, in these ancient cities between the Tigris and Euphrates. Evidence suggests cats lived side by side with people as far back as 3000 BCE. They weren't deified quite like in Egypt, but they were clearly present, especially in granaries, temples, and libraries, always near the knowledge, always near the food. You rest for a moment, the heat pressing down like a soft blanket. A cat slinks past, paws silent on stone, and disappears behind a weather-beaten column. It's funny, the sailor murmurs, how something so small could cross continents just by being useful and a little too curious. And it wasn't just along the rivers, from Babylon to Susa. Cats appear in obscure references and faded ink described not only as mousers, but as creatures associated with luck, mystery, and at times, betrayal. One ancient tale speaks of a cat who guided a lost traveler home. Another tells of one who stole a fish from the king's plate and was promoted to palace duty. Were these stories allegory, embellishment? Historians still argue. But the line between myth and memory gets fuzzy when tails and whiskers are involved. The night. You stay in a small way station built into the cliffs above the dry riverbed. The wind howls through cracks in the stone, and the air smells faintly of salt and fig leaves. The inn is simple low wooden beams, walls painted with faded flowers, but its most striking feature is a wall entirely devoted to painted cats. Not sacred, not royal, just cats sleeping, stretching. One looks smug. The innkeeper, a soft-spoken man with eyebrows that belong in an opera, sees you looking. My great-grandmother painted those, he says. She said, If you feed the cats, the house stays whole. You ask if it worked. He gestures around. The roof still holds, doesn't it? After dinner, you watch a gray cat perch on a wall and stare at the moon like it has been personally insulted by it. You don't know what she sees. Maybe ghosts, maybe moths, or maybe just her own reflection in the future. The dessert is quiet now, with only a few embers glowing in the hearth. You roll into your blanket, close your eyes, and hear one last sound before sleep: soft paws padding across your mat, and a tiny, decisive plop as a warm, furry body curls at your feet, still following the grain, still following the warmth, still making history one purr at a time. The morning brings a dusty sunrise and a camel with an attitude problem. You sip a lukewarm tea beside the stable, watching as one of the younger travelers attempts to coax the camel into motion, using both flattery and mild profanity, neither of which works. A cat nearby observes the whole thing with narrowed eyes, clearly unimpressed by either species. You're moving east again today, toward the ancient heartlands of temple cities and long-forgotten garden walls. The terrain shifts gradually: less sand, more scrubland. You pass through the remains of a village long abandoned, where even the bricks seem to sigh under the weight of memory. There, resting beside a crumbling shrine, is a painted relief still visible in the stone. You have to squint to make it out. A monk seated in meditation, eyes closed, and beside him a cat curled against a stack of scrolls. You're not surprised. The silk routes weren't just trade paths. For goods, they were arteries of belief, of ideas, of worldviews carefully packed and carried across continents. And when Buddhist monks made their way west from China or south from the Himalayas, they brought manuscripts, rituals, and often cats. In fact, you learn by midday while sharing a midday rice cake with a shaven-headed traveler in saffron robes that certain temples didn't just allow cats. They welcomed them, encouraged them, trained them, even in their own way. You're not sure what kind of training a cat is willing to accept, but the monk simply smiles. They know when not to knock over the ink bowls. Apparently, Buddhist monasteries, especially those nestled along key travel routes, doubled as way stations for pilgrims and merchants alike. Their libraries were sanctuaries of delicate knowledge manuscripts, written on paper so thin and fragile that one nibble from a mouse could erase an entire lineage of thought. So monks kept cats, not because they were cute, although they were, not even because they were companions, although many monks clearly formed bonds with them, but because they were the silent protectors of Dharma and paper form. For paws, sharp eyes, sacred purpose, you reach one of these temples by evening. It's small, built against the base of a sandstone cliff, but the prayer flags snap in the wind, and a bell rings gently at the entrance. Inside, the air is cooler, tinged with incense. The monks speak quietly, move slowly, and smile like they've seen every thought you've ever had and decided not to mention it. And there, in the corner of the meditation hall, lies a cat. It's older, judging by the silvery fur around its muzzle. It doesn't get up when you enter, doesn't move at all, just opens one eye, watches you for a moment, then closes it again. Like the meeting has been noted and logged for future karmic review. You sit on the polished floor, legs folded. As a monk begins to chant, the cadence is slow, hypnotic. You're not sure if you understand the words or if it matters. The cat purrs softly. Somehow, it harmonizes. Later, a younger monk offers you warm broth and tells you that, in their tradition, some cats are believed to be reborn monks, those who reach the threshold of enlightenment, but were too playful to stay. He adds with a wink, historians still argue whether this belief was widespread or more of a poetic side note, a way to make sense of why these animals seem to possess such uncanny grace. The temple records do show that certain cats were cared for with unusual reverence, fed first, allowed to sleep in prayer halls, even given names recorded in ceremonial logs. You glance at the older, Cat again. Still hasn't moved. Still radiating judgment and peace in equal measure. There's a story the monk shares before sleep. Long ago, a fire broke out in a temple. The flames raced toward the library, where hundreds of sacred texts were stored. The monks panicked, trying to carry what they could. But it was a small, dark-furred cat who led them to a hidden spring used by gardeners centuries earlier. With the water, they doused the fire in time. Was it true? Allegory? The monk shrugs. Maybe, he says. Maybe not. But that cat statue still guards our library. You believe it. That night, you sleep inside a small guest cell tucked behind the prayer hall. It's cold, but clean, and the blankets smell faintly of cedar. As you drift off, you hear soft footsteps outside, not human, a faint meow, a gentle scratch at the door, then silence. You smile. Of course they're here, even now. Of course the cat's never left. You wake to the softest weight imaginable, just enough to press into your feet. Not enough to stir alarm. Peeking down, you see a slender orange cat curled at the base of your blanket, purring in that half-audible rhythm that feels more like a heartbeat than a sound. It doesn't open its eyes. It doesn't need to. It knows you're awake. The monastery is already alive with motion, though motion here means something entirely different. No shouting, no clattering, just the shush of robes, the hush of sweeping brooms, the gong of a morning bell echoing through the canyon and long, resonant waves. You follow a trail of incense and footpaths toward the dining hall. As you sip barley porridge and chew dried apple slices, you notice more cats, 5 or 6 at least. One sits beneath the prayer wheel. Another balances on the edge of a window. One is trying to nap in the crook of a novice monk's elbow as he reads aloud from a scroll. There is something seamless about it, like the cats are part of the architecture. Like they were painted in with the same brush as the walls dot by mid-morning. You're back on the trail. You've left the monks with polite bows and thanks, and maybe, just maybe, a bit of envy. You trudge along a winding path toward an old trading depot where, you're told, the great silk vaults once stood. This place, according to rumor, held so much silk at one time that the walls were lined with layers of it to block out drafts. You don't know if that's true, but you're willing to find out. You arrive by early afternoon. It's more ruin than building now. Stone blocks collapsed inward like a forgotten cake. But one structure still stands, a domed hall reinforced by thick pillars. Its door warped, but not broken. Inside is shadow and silence, until you hear a faint chuff, a low growl, then the sound of a tail flicking against stone. You look up. Cats. At least 4, maybe 6, lounging like little emperors on top of thick bundles, silk, or what's left of it, still wrapped in ancient cloth. Their eyes glint gold in the low light. You step in quietly, and one of them lifts its head. The air smells faintly of dry herbs and age dust. You'd almost think the building was abandoned, except clearly it isn't. It's run by a purring garrison. A merchant nearby greets you with a nod and says, "These cats are smarter than the guards used to be." He gestures to the bundles. They keep the rats out, never miss a cent. And it's not just bundles of silk. Other traders begin unloading sealed baskets of dried spices, dried flowers, scrolls, and tinned goods. And for each group of goods, a corresponding cat, already claiming a warm, high perch, like it has a job to do. Historians still argue whether cats were assigned to specific types of cargo, or if they just had preferences. Some scrolls suggest certain silk dealers trained their cats to sleep atop certain types of dyed fabric, partly for protection, partly for display. Apparently, there's no better advertisement for the softness of your product than a cat choosing it as a nap spot, and you can imagine it. A line of bolts laid out under the sun, vibrant and bright, and a single, perfect cat draped across the most expensive one, blinking as if to say, "You can't afford this." You meet an archivist who's tagging trade parcels for documentation. She rolls her eyes when a kitten climbs onto her ink tray but smiles anyway. They chew through the rats before the rats can chew through the records, she says. Fair trade. She leads you to the corner of the hall, where silk samples are stored in ceramic cylinders. Each is plugged with oiled cloth and sealed with wax, but she still keeps a cat nearby, curled inside a half-broken basket lined with sheep's wool. It's the scent, she explains. Mice hate the smell of predator. We let the cats sleep near the bundles before we ship them. Helps ward off damage down the line. Even now, in this quiet, post-peak age of silk exchange, some of the practices continue, not because of strict rules, but because they've worked for centuries. When something works, you don't question it, especially when it purrs. You help carry in a few parcels from a weathered cart outside. One is marked with a stylized paw print on the leather strap. You ask what it means. Oh, the porter says, that's an old mark. Means the goods were inspected at a station with cats. Extra layer of trust. Historians still argue if this cat seal was ever formalized. It appears in different forms in different records, sometimes literal paw prints, other times stylized images of curled tails or narrow eyes. But traders knew what it meant. The presence of cats didn't just protect the goods, it symbolized a kind of stability. A system that functioned under the watchful gaze of creatures too proud to ask permission and too useful to ignore. As dusk approaches, the cats begin gathering on the walls again, curling up into tight spirals as the wind cools. One sprawls across the rim of an old clay vat with the effortless confidence of someone who's never been told no. You settle beside the fire with a handful of dried apricots and a borrowed blanket. A ginger cat stretches beside your foot, then curls up without asking. You don't mind. By now, it would feel strange to be alone. The stars blink into view again, and the silk vault sleeps quietly beneath them, guarded by the oldest staff of all. The next day's walk brings you through a forested stretch of road where the air is cooler, thick with pine and damp earth. It's a welcome shift from the dust and glare of the open plains. Though the path is narrow and sometimes disappears entirely beneath fallen needles, you move slowly, picking your way along the trail, eyes adjusting to the dim, dappled light. You spot movement ahead and instinctively freeze, just a flutter in the underbrush, quick and low. Then a flick of tail, a flash of white, a cat padding silently through the woods, its belly brushing the ground, tail raised like a question mark. It pauses, looks back at you for a moment as if to say, well, are you coming or not? Then melts into the trees. You follow, not because you believe the cat wants company, but because, at this point, you know better than to ignore one with a destination. Eventually, the trees thin, and a cluster of wood buildings comes into view, timber built, steep-roofed, moss-covered. A village, smaller than others you've passed, tucked deep into the hills like a secret it's in no rush to tell. There's a little one here, barely an inn, really just a converted farmhouse, with a horseshoe-shaped garden and a low wall built entirely from reclaimed bricks. But it smells of stew and smoke and damp wool, and for now, that's enough. You settle in near the hearth and notice immediately, this place has its own feline parliament. Not as many as the city inns, but just as bold. A gray cat lounges near, the ash bucket like it owns shares in the chimney. Another has claimed the top of a wooden shelf, perfectly balanced between the storage jars. The innkeeper chuckles when he sees you watching. They arrived one winter, he says, pouring you a cup of something fermented. Snow was thick, roads were shut. First came 1, then 2, then 5. After that, we just stopped counting. He tells you how in the worst winters, the cats would climb into the eaves, sleep above the kitchen fire, and emerge like small, soot-covered goblins in spring. We used to think they were pests, he admits. Now we feed them before we feed the guests, Turns out, in these highland stops often cut off during snow or landslides, cats served another unexpected role. Insulation, more specifically, body heat. When snows fell and supplies dwindled, travelers would share narrow beds and layered blankets, and the cats, drawn by the warmth, would nest alongside them. One merchant's diary even noted that the cats of Hill Pass Inn are a blessing, for they sleep at the neck and the knees, and so one wakes neither frozen nor alone. The innkeeper's daughter, maybe 10 years old, chimes in cheerfully. We call it cat stacking, like layers of warmth. You get 2 on your chest, 1 on your feet, and if you're lucky, the mean one curls under your arm. You ask if the mean one has a name. He used to, she says solemnly. But then he bit someone who said it out loud. So we don't anymore. Fair enough. As the evening wears on and the fire crackles low, guests gather to share stories and pass around a tin of dried mushrooms. One man, a trader from the west, begins a tale with, "Back in the storm of '93, I owed my life to a tabby with frost on his whiskers," and off he goes, spinning a yarn about being trapped between 2 way stations, snow rising to the camel's knees, and a cat that kept him warm, biting his nose every hour so he wouldn't fall asleep for good. It's ridiculous. It's charming. You believe every word. Historians still argue whether cats were deliberately bred in colder silk root regions for temperament and fluff, or whether only the fluffiest survived the mountain climates. Either way, records from high altitude and especially in regions near the Tian Shan or Karakoram passes mention cats more frequently than in desert stretches, sometimes with affection, sometimes with grudging respect, always with acknowledgement. You explore the garden behind the inn before bed. Snow is still packed in shaded corners, but green shoots are pushing through. 2 cats walk the garden wall, like tightrope performers, tails brushing together briefly before going opposite directions. One perches beside you as you look up at the stars again. You wonder not for the first time how many travelers along these same paths, hundreds or even thousands of years ago, sat in this exact spot, hands curled around warm drinks. Kit beside them, breath clouding the air. How many of them knew they'd sleep warm that night inside? The beds are narrow and the blankets thin, but the cats come anyway. One crawls beneath your arm without asking. Another presses against your back, making a noise that is half sigh, half dash purr. Sleep wraps around you slowly, steadily. And in the quiet, snow-draped hush of the highlands, the guardians with whiskers take their pose again. You wake to frost on the window and fur on your face, specifically. A cat tail light, flicking, and definitely not apologetic. The culprit, a thick-coated marmalade beast with one ear folded back like a page in a book, doesn't even acknowledge your complaint, just hops off the bed with the air of someone late for a very important sunbeam. The inn smells like pine smoke and yeast. Someone's baking flatbread in the kitchen hearth, and the sound of a broom brushing the floorboards forms a gentle rhythm beneath it all. You take your time, stretch slowly, shake the stiffness out of your limbs, and gather your things. Today's journey takes you down again from highland mist to lower plateaus where the wind picks up speed, and the road spreads wider. You fall in with a group of textile traders from Samarkand. They have the carts for donkeys, and one gray and white cat who travels in a wooden box lined with fabric samples. She picks the colors. One trader jokes, always sleeps on the blue silk, never the red. Customers notice as it turns out. This is not an isolated belief. Across multiple towns, from valleys to marketplaces, you start hearing similar stories, tales of cats with color preferences, texture opinions, even taste. They'll chew through a bad bolt, a woman insists, gesturing toward her basket of hand-dyed wool. Never the good stuff. It's like they know. You chuckle, but then you see it yourself, one particularly fluffy feline at a roadside. Workshop walks straight past 3 bundles of raw silk and climbs onto the one that's already been washed, dyed, and sun-dried. It needs it twice, curls up, and falls asleep immediately. Coincidence? Maybe. But still. Artisans across the silk routes began associating certain cat behaviors with quality control. If a cat rejected a fabric, refused to sit on it, sniffed it, and walked away, it was seen as a bad omen. One weaver in a mountain village even has a tiny placard, "Pass the purr test." Historians still argue whether these superstitions evolved independently in different trade hubs, or if they stemmed from a single merchant guild with a flair for drama. Some fragments of guild records from Bukhara mention field verified silks, listed at premium prices. Whether this was genuine quality assurance or clever marketing, well, the jury's out. You reach a riverside town by dusk. Stone bridges crisscross the water like stitched threads, and the market is just closing for the day. You stop at a dyer's courtyard where skeins of yarn hang in bold colors: crimson, ochre, indigo, fluttering gently in the breeze, and beneath them, a row of cats, each curled in the shade of a dye pot. The dyer grins as she stirs a vat of violet blue liquid. "They like the warmth," she says, "and they scare the rats off the ropes." You learn that drying textiles is delicate work. One drop thread, one knot cord, and the whole batch could be ruined. Cats became unofficial guards not just of the threads, but of the piece. They warded off not only pests, but birds, squirrels, and even nosy children. Some dye houses went so far as to build cat towers, wooden ledges, and balconies specifically for the cats to perch on, giving them a full view of the workyard. In return, the cats stayed and judged, always judged. You eat dinner beneath a trellis of grapevines, surrounded by bowls of chickpeas, fried onion, and flatbread so soft it practically folds itself. One of the cats lies on the low wall nearby, belly to the stars, paws twitching with dreams. A group of tailors joins your table and tells stories about their shop in a larger city, a place where cats aren't just tolerated, they're used as mascots. We give them names, one says, but they don't listen. The others nod in agreement, as though that's the most natural outcome in the world. One tailor leans in, voice conspiratorial. "A cat once climbed onto a bride's veil during fitting. We thought it was ruined, but she loved it. Said the cat's blessing would bring her a happy marriage, paid double." That story gets a round of laughter and some gentle swats on the shoulder from the others. But you can tell it's true. There's a quiet reverence under the humor. Later that night, you explore a nearby warehouse where imported cloth is stored in cedar-lined crates. The workers show you a makeshift cat tunnel, a narrow channel beneath the beams that allows feline traffic to move freely through the upper lofts. You ask if it was designed for them. One worker shrugs. No one remembers. But we keep it clear. The cats use it. That's enough. Above, high in the rafters, you see eyes glinting back at you. More watchers. More tail-witching quality control officers. You fall asleep that night in a room above a weaver's shop, the wooden beams creaking gently in the wind. A tabby pads across your chest once, checking your temperature like a nurse with opinions, then settles by your pillow. Outside, looms go silent, lamps go dark, but the purrs, soft and steady, continue. And somewhere between silk and superstition, another cat curls up in the right corner of another bolt of cloth, choosing comfort and confirming value. The sun rises over a town of looms and thread, casting long gold lines through open windows and across folded bolts of cloth. You stretch slowly, stiff from the wood frame bed, and feel the gentle weight of a cat pressing against your calf. Still asleep, still warm, still unbothered by your plans for the day. Outside, the weavers are already at work. The click-clack of looms hums like a heartbeat. Colors flutter from balconies like flags of soft rebellion, crimsons, saffrons, and pale jade. A cat perched high on a rooftop edge watches it all unfold like a foreman taking attendance. You continue your journey on foot, following a narrow trail that hugs a river's bend. The land levels out, giving way to stretches of farmland. Rice paddies glisten in the morning light. Water buffalo plod along the dikes. Somewhere, a chorus of frogs joins the day's conversation. And along the edges of the fields, you spot movement small, low to the ground, and deliberate. Cats, dozens, it seems, some stalking the reeds, some sunning on stones, one, inexplicably, floating on a plank of wood like a tiny maritime god. When you reach the village proper, it becomes clear. This is rice country, and rice attracts birds, and birds attract well. You already know. The cats here are lean, fast, and confident. They dart between grain sheds and storage bins like wind-blown shadows. One farmer laughs as a kitten pounces onto her straw hat and promptly falls asleep there. We used to try dogs, she tells you, but they bark too much, scared the buffalo. Cats are quieter, more polite. Historians still argue whether agricultural communities along the eastern Silk routes developed distinct cat handling traditions independent of their urban counterparts, or whether the habits filtered down from trade hubs. Either way, here in this sleepy, verdant village, cats aren't merely tolerated, their staff. You spend time at the granary, where workers haul sacks of rice up into raised platforms. Beneath these structures, cats roam like sentries. One pauses beside your foot, stares at your boot, then climbs a stack of sacks and disappears into the rafters. Watch this, a boy says, gesturing to a basket of grain left momentarily unattended. You look. Seconds later, a rat attempts to scurry across the open floor. It doesn't make it to steps before calico drops from the rafters, with such surgical precision that you actually flinch. The boy grins. She's our best hunter. We call her General. The nickname's not ironic. It turns out many of the villages along the lower trade routes named their cats, not just pet names, but titles: General, Captain, Watchman, Spice, Guardian. A few wore hand-woven collars with tiny bells or symbols stitched in. One wore a single earring, though it's unclear whether that was intentional or just the result of a close call with a loom. In a small courtyard, an elderly woman tells you her family has always kept cats by the granary. They see what we don't, she says. When a rat dares to run at noon, something else is wrong. You ask what she means. She smiles. Rats know when floods are coming, or illness, or war. But cats know what the rats know. And we. She gestures at herself, her house, her little dog-eared village. We know the cats. It's oddly comforting. You visit a rice merchant store before sunset, where bundles of paper-wrapped rice are stored like bricks of treasure. A sign reads, "No cat, no entry." You point to it, and the shopkeeper laughs. Old joke, he says. But not really, apparently. Certain traveling merchants refuse to store their grain in inns or warehouses without cats. Present it became a shorthand for safety if a place had cats. It was trustworthy. If it didn't, something was wrong. Maybe the rodents had already won. Maybe the inn was haunted. Or maybe, worst of all, the food wasn't worth protecting. You hear stories about traveling rice caravans that carried cats along with them, often riding in baskets or curled beneath the driver's seat. One caravan even embroidered tiny cats on their wagon covers for luck. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic or practical. But when you see a kitten curled into a spare rice bowl near the fire pit that evening, you understand why it probably didn't matter. Dinner is simple. Soft rice, ginger spice vegetables, and lentils cooked in clay pots. As you eat, cats weave through the group like drifting spirits brushing ankles, chasing insects. curling into the folds of robes and shawls. No one objects, no one even notices, really. They've been here longer than any of you. Later, as night blankets the village in quiet fog, you sleep inside a bamboo hut overlooking the fields. The walls are thin, but the blankets are warm, and so are the 3 cats who settle in beside you. One on your chest, heavy and purring. One behind your knees, anchoring your dreams. And one by the door, watching. Always watching. You awaken slowly, greeted first by the scent of damp earth, then by a paw pressed gently against your chin. The cat from last night, the one who slept on your chest, now wants breakfast, or attention, or maybe it just wants to remind you who's really in charge of this journey. Outside, the mist clings low across the rice paddies. Workers already dot the fields, their silhouettes bending and rising with the rhythm of a slow, practiced dance. You sip warm tea with the innkeeper on a woven mat as the cats wrestle nearby over a piece of roasted yam. The innkeeper chuckles, unbothered. Cats are honest, he says. They never pretend not to want something. You back your things and move on. The path east winds past low hills, marked by wooden markers carved with prayers, and by trees tied with strips of cloth, fluttering like forgotten messages. You begin to notice another shift in the landscape, not just in soil or temperature, but in the architecture. The towns grow closer together, homes tighter, alleys narrower. You're entering a zone of heavier traffic, a region where goods, languages, and habits pile up like cushions in a crowded bazaar. And along with the bustle, cats, again, of course. This time, though, their presence feels different. You pause at a tea house around midday, a small one with curved roof tiles, and steam rising from 3 blackened kettles. Inside, the walls are covered not with paintings, but with paper notices, scribbled notes, and messages penned with copper tacks. Among them, dozens of little drawings of cats. Fat cats, angry cats, sleeping cats. Some so abstract they look like question marks with whiskers, all drawn with fondness. You ask the owner what they are. Missing cats, she says, pouring your tea. You glance around. Several cats lounge under tables and in window sills. One bats at a dangling ornament above the door. They're not really lost, she explains. People draw their favorites before leaving. They say it helps them find their way back. Tradition, a superstition? Historians still argue whether this ritual originated as genuine lost notices or evolved into a cultural quirk for traveling customers. But here, it seems to be both a way to remember and perhaps to be remembered. You move on through the town and discover something unexpected. Cat temples. Not large, not gaudy, usually just a small shrine tucked beside a house or beneath a tree. A stone platform, a wooden statue, a dish of milk, and, if you're lucky, a real cat perched nearby, doing its absolute best to ignore the whole thing. You meet a craftsman polishing a carved feline figure with exaggerated whiskers and wide, staring eyes. He says it's for a family who lost a cat during the harvest season. They leave offerings for protection, he tells you. Not just for cats, for the house, for safe travels, for good sleep. The more you ask, the more stories you hear. One woman tells you about a tradition where children place a small paper cat under their pillow during exam season, hoping it will absorb nightmares and increase wisdom. It's not the cats who dream, she says. It's that they remember your dreams, so you don't have to. Another merchant shares a tale of a cat who followed a caravan all the way from Kashgar to Chang'an, appearing in camp every night without ever riding a cart or being carried. We tried to leave it behind, he says, shaking his head 3 times, but it always found us. In the end, we paid it in fish. Historians still argue whether the idea of cats as spiritual protectors originated from local animist traditions, or blended in from Buddhist and Taoist imagery along the route. In some carvings, cats are shown leaping between worlds, between shadow and fire, wake and sleep, small gods in soft fur. By evening, you arrive at a courtyard inn with paper lanterns swaying in the breeze. A sign over the gate reads, "Safe resting." For man and cat. Inside, the rooms are small but clean. A shallow basin of milk waits near each threshold, and the cats move through the inn like they built it. One even taps its paw against a bell by the kitchen door, and within seconds, a boy appears with dried fish, dinner service, he says, grinning. As you eat steamed buns, pickled greens, and warm broth, a man at your table explains that, in this region, cats are believed to guard dreams, not prevent nightmares necessarily, but catch them, like hunters, chasing the bad ones down and dragging them into dark corners where they won't come back. They don't get rid of your fear, he says. They just make it manageable. It sounds like nonsense. It also sounds true. That night, your bed is simple, a mat and a blanket. Nothing more. The air smells faintly of lotus and vinegar outside. The lanterns cast gentle orange circles across the floor. As you lie down, a striped cat climbs onto your chest, tucks its paws beneath its body, and closes its eyes. You don't dare move, and you don't need to. Sleep arrives like a river current, inevitable, steady, deep. The cat breathes slowly, and beside you, whatever dreams were coming seem to change their minds. You wake not with a jolt, but with a breath, slow, silent, and synchronized with the rise and fall of the cat still curled on your chest. It doesn't open its eyes when you stir. It just emits one long, vibrating purr, like it's tuning the world back into frequency. Outside, early risers murmur and yawn as they shuffle through morning chores. You hear the sweep of straw brooms, the clang of a bucket, and the soft clack-clack of mahjong tiles from a nearby courtyard where old men have decided that sleep is for other people. Your chest cat finally stretches, needs your blanket 3 times for good measure, then vanishes through the door like a shadow slipping underwater. It's time to move again. Your route takes you deeper into the city, a former hub of silk traders, lacquer craftsmen, and scholars now turn sleepy and sun-stained. The streets wind like threads from a spindle, and along every wall, rooftop, and lintel cats. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Not just house cats or alley cats, but what the locals call archive cats. You follow a narrow stairway up to the public library, a building more ancient than elegant, its stone steps worn smooth, its wooden sign faded to the color of dry leaves. The librarian waves you inside and then immediately hisses not at you, but at a tabby perched on a fragile manuscript shelf. She does this every morning, he mutters, trying and failing to look stern. The cat jumps down, looking more amused than sorry. Inside, the air is thick with dust, and that curious scent of old parchment, a smell that feels like memory. Scrolls are stacked on shelves that lean like tired men, bamboo slats, paper codices, cloth-wrapped ledgers, and on every shelf, without fail, a cat. Some sleep, some blink slowly at you. One appears to be guarding a shelf of tax records like its inheritance depends on it. The librarian offers you tea in a chipped porcelain cup and begins explaining the whole setup. Cats are essential, he says plainly. We've had rats chew through dynasties. Rodents don't care if the emperor wrote it or a potter's apprentice did. To them, it's all delicious. Historians still argue whether certain libraries along the Silk routes, especially in China's western provinces, train cats as part of official archival policy, or whether their presence simply became customary over centuries. But some surviving records do hint at it, notations in margins like Xiaohu upset mice chewed binding, and return to section after cat repositioned to roof. You raise an eyebrow. Repositioned. The librarian shrugs. They like different corners at different times of day. You learn to work around them, not with them. He walks you through a gallery of ancient documents all stored in elevated cabinets with hinged lids. The design, built specifically to allow cats to nap atop the cabinet without damaging what's inside. And they do, in great numbers. Some days. He explains, the archive feels less like a library and more like a cat monastery where the books are allowed to stay as long as they're quiet. You spot a large calico lying across a poetry anthology. Its paw curled over a page titled Reflections on the Moon Over Water. The librarian sighs. She always sleeps on that one. He says, poets must smell like fish. From a historical perspective, the value of feline guardians in libraries is often overlooked. But here, cats were not just protectors of scrolls, they were quiet cohabitants of knowledge. Their presence meant that books stayed legible, their fur, their warmth. Even their movement helped regulate the humidity in drafty spaces. One document kept in a glass case shows a paw print inked directly onto the corner of a treatise on trade tax. The librarian notes it's from over 400 years ago. We left it, he says. It adds credibility later. You help rearrange a few shelves as part of your unofficial boarding fee. As you shift a stack of rice paper records, a ginger cat leaps from a window ledge, lands silently on the top shelf, and proceeds to knock a wooden bead from the desk onto the floor. Why? Unclear. Possibly boredom. Possibly art. Dinner is served in the archivist's quarters, simple congee, pickled greens, and a fermented tofu dish that might be delicious or a minor crime, depending on your taste. One of the older scribes regales you with the story of a cat who supposedly dictated a poem to a scholar in a dream. It was about a tree that bloomed only when no one was looking, he says, eyes twinkling. He swore he woke up with the last stanza written on his wrist. In paw prints. Double quote sure. Why not? As night falls, the library goes still. Candles burn low. The cats retreat to the warmest places under the desks, on top of writing mats, between scroll cases. One decides your lap is perfectly acceptable and settles in before you can protest. You don't move. You don't even breathe too loudly. And somewhere in the hush, you wonder how many pages in the history of the silk routes owe their survival not to emperors or armies but to soft paws, keen eyes, and a tendency to nap on important things. You wake not in your bed, but in a chair by a low writing table, your back cricked and your legs half asleep. The cat in your lap, however, is entirely fine, deep in REM sleep, paws twitching like it's chasing ink pots in a dream. You'd move, but you're not that brave. Eventually, though, nature wins. You ease the cat off gently, very gently, and stand with the kind of stiffness that only comes from falling asleep on a woven stool surrounded by scrolls. Outside, the day is gray and hushed. A drizzle falls over the rooftops in a steady whisper, turning the stone streets dark and slick. You decide not to rush. The rain brings a quiet intimacy to the world. And after the crowded marketplace of your last stop, this silence is welcome to days. Route leads you past a string of smaller courier stations, little more than wooden huts, with long awnings and rain barrels. These were the relay points of the Silk Roads, the beating pulse of correspondence. Traders sent letters, governments sent decrees, families sent tiny packages wrapped in cloth, folded like wishes, and cats. Oh, they were here to dot at the first courier station you stop in, a low, narrow structure with a roof sagging under the weight of accumulated moss. To cats dart past your legs the moment you enter. One disappears behind a crate, the other hops onto the counter and knocks over a bottle of sealing wax like it's declaring bankruptcy. The courier barely looks up. Don't mind her, he says. She thinks she runs the place. Turns out, many of these stations, especially ones located between major stops, were more dependent on cats than even the larger inns or warehouses. Why? Because of the papered ink, wax, parchment, paper, all vulnerable, all fragrant, all deeply attractive to pests. Courier cats weren't just companions. They were crucial in many stations. The salary of a courier included a small ration of fish or meat specifically for the cats. If the cat population dropped, so did letter reliability. You sit beneath a wooden eave while the rain drums a soft rhythm overhead. The courier tells you about his most reliable assistant, a cat named Lamp, who once chased a weasel halfway down a ravine to save a sealed envelope from being gnawed. She brought it back with her teeth marks on the corner, but it was still legible, he says with no small amount of pride. Historians still argue whether cats were officially part of the courier system's infrastructure or merely tolerated freeloaders, but certain records mention feline-related bonuses, including extra supplies for cat-friendly stations. And get this, performance-based dried fish allowances. You're not making that up. At the next stop, a younger courier proudly shows you a cat ledger. It's literally a little book where they record cat sightings. Who showed up, who didn't, and which cat stayed through the night. The ledger includes sketches, doodles, really. One entry simply reads, "Fluffy triangle-eared menace ate the ink stick again." Another reads, "Stripey watched me write a whole letter. I think he's judging my grammar." Further along the trail, as the rain begins to thin to a drizzle, you reach a more refined posting house or relay point for higher priority messages. Built in carved stone with wood beam roofing. Here, the cats are different, more aloof, more elegant. One wears a thin red cord around its neck. Another has a tiny bell, muted with wax to muffle the sound. They walk through the place like diplomats, nodding to no one. This station supervisor offers you a seat and a cup of bitter, smoky tea. She tells you that during periods of unrest or political change, cats often served as unexpected messengers themselves. No joke, she says. Sipping, there were whole stretches of road too dangerous for people, bandits, border skirmishes. But cats, no one stops a cat, she leans. And sometimes we tie a note to a collar. Not official, of course, but effective. You raise an eyebrow. She's either embellishing or she's just opened the door to one of the stranger corners of Silk Road history. Historians still argue whether cats were ever used this way intentionally or if it's one of those charming post-fact myths. The idea of message-bearing cats crossing the hills unbothered is both absurd and strangely plausible. After all, who would question a cat? As the day fades, you stop by one last station, this one practically collapsing into the hillside. The roof leaks, the walls lean, but there's a fire going, and the smell of steamed dumplings makes your stomach answer before you do. A very old man sits near the hearth, feeding crumbs to 3 one-eyed cats and telling them stories. You listen quietly from the doorway and then, he says, voice barely louder than the rain. The letter arrived, smelled like fish, and had teeth marks on it. Still carried the news from 1,000 miles away. The cats purr in unison. Or maybe that's the wind. It's hard to tell. You sleep that night in the loft of the station, tucked into straw mats and layered blankets. Rain dances on the shingles. Above, a cat curls beside your head, tucks its paws in, and closes its eyes. Maybe it once carried secrets. Maybe it just likes the warmth. Either way, the message is clear. The next morning arrives like spilled ink, gray, slow, and soaking into everything. You roll over beneath the straw blankets, expecting to feel the weight of a familiar paw or the gentle press of a cat's curled form against your back, but nothing. You sit up. The loft is empty. The cats are gone. You make your way downstairs, half expecting a feline welcoming committee, but instead, you find only the station master, already preparing tea. They're out hunting, she explains, gesturing vaguely toward the hills. Mornings like this, They go looking for movement. Rain wakes the mice up. Of course it does. You step outside, the road damp beneath your boots, the clouds still grumbling above. The next stretch of the Silk Road curves eastward through the foothills, less dramatic than the mountain passes, but no less rich with stories. Here, the terrain is dotted with caravanserais, those roadside fortresses that fed, watered, and occasionally patched up the wandering merchant soul. In. Yes, every single one seems to come with cats. The first you reach is surrounded by fields of millet and wild barley. The building itself is square and stern, its sandstone walls pocked with centuries of wind and rain. But inside it feels like a sanctuary. The courtyard hums with the life of 100 small chores, spices being sorted, mules brushed down, boots repaired, and in the middle of it all, sprawled across a sun-warmed ledge, are no fewer than 7 cats. One rolls onto its back, displaying a belly so plush it could be marketed as a sleep aid. A traveler from Coton Short, bearded and wearing a sash, bright enough to startle birds, leans towards you and whispers, "That one there, don't fall for it. That belly is a trap." You laugh, but heed the warning. He explains that cats here are more than mascots. They're lucky charms. It's not enough to have cats, there are rituals around them. Superstitions. Before we set out, he says, the head cook lets one of them sniff the stew. If it walks away, we don't leave the day. You blink. Seriously. He nods. No joke. Cats know things. Historians still argue whether this kind of feline forecasting was regional or widespread. Some suggest it was adapted from older animistic beliefs, while others think it was a product of pure practicality. After all, if the cat refuses food, maybe there's something off with the meat, or the weather, or the energy in the room. Whatever the case, it's stuck in this caravanserai. The cats are treated with a level of reverence that edges on religious. One has its own cushion. Another has a tiny woven harness, never used, mind you, but worn ceremonially at feast days. You learn about the departure papyrus ritual. Before a caravan sets out, the leader tries to coax a cat to walk across a cloth square laid by the gate. If the papyrus form a clean arc curve, but continuous, it's a good omen. If they smudge, or the cat refuses, well, best to wait a day. You're shown a few of these cloths, now preserved like relics. One asks for perfect papyrus in a row, stamped in a mix of soot and turmeric. Another has a tail swipe across the bottom edge, as if the cat was thoroughly over it. In the main hall, a fresco adorns the wall, faded but unmistakable, a caravan crossing a desert. And at the lead, walking just ahead of the camels, yes, a small cat, head high, tail curled. It's symbolic, a local explains. The cat leads when others hesitate. The night, as the fires crackle and bowls of lentil stew are passed around, you listen to stories told under the stars. One man swears a cat saved him from poison by knocking his cup over twice. Another claims a cat once led his camel back to a caravan during a sandstorm. Walking ahead for hours like a strippy compass, you don't ask whether they're true. At this point, truth feels beside the point. You fall asleep in a corner chamber. Stone walls cool against your back, a low window letting in the night breeze. A cat hops silently up beside you and curls into your arm like it was drawn there. And as the shadows stretch long across the desert beyond, you remember something someone said at the archive. Cats don't protect your body, they protect your luck. You hope this one stays. You rise to sunlight streaming through the low window, painted golden with dust motes that dance and flicker like embers caught midair. The cat in your arm is gone, but a faint indentation in the blanket, still warm, marks where it slept. You don't call for it. If it wants to return, it will. If not, well, you've learned by now that cats on the silk routes come and go as they please. And always with reason. Outside, the desert is quiet. The caravanserai is already stirring with the usual half-choreographed chaos, traders shouting over camel loads, travelers squinting at faded maps, and someone frantically trying to catch a goat that has very much decided to leave. You shoulder your pack and head eastward, following a stretch of road that was once the vein of the fur trade. And like every artery of commerce along these ancient paths, it comes with its own ecosystem of stops, shelters, and feline foot soldiers. This region is more arid, now long stretches of hard-packed earth punctuated by scraggly brush and rock, outcrops that could pass for sleeping giants. It's not empty, though. These trade posts are sparser, but more fortified, and every few hours, you come across one, a low, square building made of sun-baked brick with tiny slit windows and thick, wooden doors. Inside, there's cool water, hard bread, salted meat, and always at least one cat. The first outpost is manned by a weary woman who barely looks up from her ledger as you enter. Sign in. Choose a cot. Don't feed the orange one. You blink. Why not? He'll follow you all the way to Turpin. Sure enough, a large orange tomcat appears at your side 10 minutes later, tail held high, eyes half-lidded with judgment. He's not mean. The woman concedes, handing you a bowl of soup. Just clingy. And he snores, apparently. Even. Along these dry and wine-swept plains, the reputation of the post cats precedes them. Each has a name, though half are in jokes. Sultan. Who sleeps in the food crates? Tudos. Who's missing 3? Dustball. Who is, in fact, pitch black. These felines serve as a kind of unspoken continuity. When you arrive at a station and the cat is there, stretched out in the sun or perched on a warm windowsill, it means things are normal, safe, undisturbed. But when the cat's not there, well, people notice. One traveler tells you that last year, at a certain desert post, the absence of the cat caused an entire group to turn around and find a different camp. We said it was superstition, he admits. But no one slept. Too quiet, too still, like the air had stopped working. Historians still argue whether cats developed this mythic status on their own merit, or whether humans simply projected comfort and stability onto whatever furry thing showed up consistently and didn't try to stab them. The records from desert posts do include multiple mentions of cats being tied figuratively, not literally, to the health of a shelter. Station was in disrepair. Roof leaked. The cat left. That sort of thing. You stop for the night at a former silk tax checkpoint that now houses caravans moving mostly spices. And eyes. The outpost commander, an elderly man with deep-set eyes and a permanent squint, greets you with a nod and a question. Do you want the bed with or without the cat? You hesitate. With, you say. He nods like this is the correct answer. You'll sleep better. And you do. The bed is little more than a cot and a padded mat. But a gray striped cat hops up beside you halfway through the night, does one slow lap around your legs, and then curls up on your chest like it's clocking. And for a shift, outside, the desert wind whistles gently through carved vents. Inside, the cat purrs with a rhythm that matches your breath. You think about all the outposts, all the relay stations, all the stops like this one, each made bearable by warm soup, steady floors, and small, watchful eyes. You remember one trader's phrase from earlier. Cats are the compass of peace. When they settle, so can you. The gray striped cat shifts, nudges its nose under your chin, and exhales. You take the hint dot and drift off without another word. You awaken to the sound of a spoon tapping against a clay bowl, steady, soft, and oddly rhythmic. For a moment, you lie still beneath your blanket, letting the vibration of the cat's purring on your chest echo through your ribs. When you finally sit up, the cat lets out one long, slow yawn, then casually hops off, like its job is done. The outpost is already stirring. A kettle whistles somewhere, and the scent of cumin and boiled eggs drifts in through the cracked shutters. You stretch, thank the commander, and head east again. The trail is quieter now, fewer caravans, fewer inns, more time between settlements, yet even here, the cats seem to travel ahead of you, as if leaving soft-pawed footprints in the sand for you to follow. Midday brings you to a watering stop nestled beside a crumbling ziggurat half-shrine. Halfway station. The kind of place merchants used to refill canteens, feed their animals, and maybe scribble a prayer or two on the worn stones before continuing on. There's a faded fresco above the fountain, half-eaten by sun and sand. But if you squint, you can still make it out. A stylized cat seated beside a camel, both gazing in the same direction. A traveler tells you it's called the Wayfinder, he adds, in a tone somewhere between serious and superstitious. When you don't know which road is safe, you wait for the cat. You glance around. Sure enough, a small orange cat perches on the edge of the fountain, licking a paw and ignoring everyone further along the trail. The terrain turns rougher, rockier, less forgiving. You pass a trader's caravan, whose mules wear little talismans made of knotted silk and bells. Each knot includes a cat's face woven into the pattern. Luck, the merchant says. One paw up for wealth, two paws up for speed. Historians still argue whether this two paws up motif began along the silk routes, or was imported from elsewhere. But it's clear the feline image had become universal shorthand for good fortune. By the time traders started mass-producing charm knots for fellow travelers, some cats even appear carved into combs, painted onto flasks, or stitched onto the linings of hats. One elderly woman, sitting beside a stall of herbal remedies, shows you her cat talisman. It's made from cherry wood, polished smooth and worn around the neck on a faded red cord. She gave birth in my storeroom during a plague season, she says, gently rubbing the talisman's tiny nose. Not one rat touched our herbs. We didn't lose a single dose. Later in the afternoon, you stop to rest beneath the shade of a sandstone overhang, feet dusty, water warm, and spirits flagging. A youth walks past with two goats, a bundle of dried figs, and a small black kitten clinging to his shoulder like it owns the map to a buried city. She's learning, he says, tapping the kitten's nose. First rule is, sleep anywhere you want. Second is, don't look like you're guarding anything. That's how you guard everything. You try not to laugh and fail. As the sun begins to dip low, casting gold across the stones and hills, you reach a fortress town built like a puzzle. High walls, sharp corners, and alleys that turn back on themselves like a test of patience. You could get lost here. Most people do. But not the cats. They move like they built the place. You follow one through the maze, half out of curiosity, half out of growing respect. It leads you past pottery vendors, knife sharpeners, and a boy carving tiny animal figures from chalk. Then, with a tail flick, the cat turns sharply into a shaded courtyard filled with a gentle hush of fountains and the smell of ROSEWAT or dot and in. You never saw the sign, but the cat did dot inside. The walls are painted with a soft wash of blue, latticed windows let in honey-colored light, and everywhere as always there are cats. One curled in a window box, two asleep in the shoe rack. A massive white tomcat sprawled in the exact center of the lobby floor, like it's daring you to walk around him. The innkeeper greets you with a smile and a phrase you're starting to hear more often. If the cats trust you, we will too. That night, you eat bread still warm from the fire oven, lentils with saffron, and honey-soaked apricots. The cats doze by the fire, rising only when the wind picks up and the innkeeper tosses an extra log into the hearth. You climb to your room slowly, feet heavy but heart light. The bed is high and firm. The sheets smell faintly of mint. and the window looks out across the rooftops where 3 or 4 dark shapes curl against chimneys. And tiles. You lie down. And just before sleep takes you, something light and warm lands at the foot of the bed. The kitten from earlier, the shoulder rider, has found you. You blink. It blinks back. Then it settles in beside your feet like you've passed some kind of invisible test. Maybe you have. Morning arrives with a lazy beam of sunlight slicing across your blanket, warming the tops of your toes. The kitten from last night is still there, tucked into the crook of your ankle like a forgotten glove. You smile and stretch, feeling the comfortable stiffness of well-earned sleep in your bones. You rise slowly, careful not to disturb your feline foot warmer, and pad over to the window. The fortress town glows under the early light, rooftops gently steaming as the sun burns off the dew. Below, a handful of cats traverse the narrow alleys with the air of creatures, performing an ancient and invisible duty. You descend to the inn's courtyard, where breakfast is already underway. Steamed dumplings, rice porridge, and green tea so delicate it tastes like a breeze. The innkeeper sits beside the main fountain, feeding a cluster of cats from a hand-woven tray. She offers you a dumpling and a simple statement: "They keep the ghosts away." You pause, dumpling halfway to your mouth. "Ghosts," she nods, not looking up. "Bad memories, regrets, things people bring with them but don't want to unpack." The cats sense them. They sweep them away in their sleep. You chew thoughtfully, unsure whether to laugh or ask for more details. You do both. Historians still argue whether cats along the Silk routes were ever tied to formal spiritual practices. But in pockets like this, towns built from generations of traders coming and going, the belief in their unseen duties runs deep. Cats here aren't just pest control, they're emotional control. Little monks in fur coats, purring through your problems. You leave the fortress town just as the city gate creaks open. The guards nod as you pass, one of them distractedly scratching a tabby perched on his shoulder like a parrot. You travel on foot that morning, the road soft and forgiving beneath your boots. Rolling plains stretch out before you, dotted with the occasional fig tree or wild pomegranate shrub. You pass a cluster of tense nomadic traders stopping for shade. Their camp is compact and efficient, with camels tied in a semicircle and bundles arranged neatly beneath canvas. And yes, even here, cats. One naps on top of a coiled rug. Another stalks a lizard through the dust. A third licks a pot clean. Beside the fire, you're offered tea and a spot in the shade, which you accept gladly. The eldest in the group, a woman with silver-streaked braids and hands like weathered parchment, pours your cup with practiced grace. "We travel light," she says, "but we always leave room for them." She gestures at the cats. They don't eat much, but they give more than food can buy. You sip your tea and ask how long they've been bringing cats on the road. She chuckles. "Longer than we've had wheels, apparently." Some nomadic groups along the Silk routes kept dedicated cat baskets, wicker carriers lined with felt specifically for their traveling companions. The cats adapted well to the constant motion, finding comfort in predictable rituals. A blanket here, a bowl there, a lap when the wind got cold. You watch as one such cat jumps into a merchant's lap and promptly flops over, boneless and trusting. The merchant gently begins to comb its fur with a carved horn tool. "We say a cat's coat holds the memory of the road," he tells you. "Dust from one town, ash from another, fur brush in the shape of stories." The night you stay in a halfway house, not quite an inn, not quite a family home run by a mother and her 3 grown sons. Their outer courtyard is filled with drying fruit, crack pots, and cats. So many cats. One sleeps in a sieve, another in a saddlebag, to nap curled together in a cooking pot, their tails forming a near-perfect spiral. You ask if they're all hers. She snorts. "No one owns a cat, but we host them, and it shows." Tiny steps have been built against the walls so cats can access the roof. Bowls of clean water are tucked discreetly behind furniture. Even the bread oven has a covered corner lined with fabric for heat-loving kittens. After dinner, spiced lentils and flatbread brushed with oil you sit in the courtyard. While the stars come out one by one, the air is still warm, but with a whisper of cool that hints at changing regions ahead. The suns play music, soft and repetitive, the kind of tune that encourages both dreaming and digestion. A cat climbs into your lap halfway through the second verse and rests its chin on your knee, tail flicking lazily with a beat. Do they ever fight? You ask. The youngest son grins. Only with roosters and ghosts. There it is again. Ghost. You wonder fleetingly how much pain has passed through these roads. How many tears, hopes, and secrets were carried on camelback, or tucked into a letter, or buried in the corner of someone's sleep, and how many of those found rest, or at least silence, thanks to the patient weight of a cat's body, curled beside them through the night. The music continues, the stars bloom above, and the cat on your lap purrs you slowly, steadily, into something deeper than sleep. The next morning, you rise before the sun fully crests the hills, waking to that soft, rustling stillness just before a town exhales. The courtyard cats are already moving, stretching, grooming, silently slipping between sleeping mats and empty bowls. The one that slept on your lap the night before gives you a single slow blink and pads away. Mission complete. You step into the road with the faint scent of roasted wheat still lingering in your clothes. Ahead lies a region of tighter valleys and steeper trails. A passage many traders once dreaded, not for bandits or terrain, but because the weather here is famously indecisive. Rain in the morning, sun by lunch, snow by nightfall. All possible, all probable. You crest a low ridge and look down into a basin where another inn awaits, half fortress, half refuge, built of dark timber and low stone. You trudge downhill as clouds begin to churn above, and by the time you reach the inn's heavy wooden doors, fat raindrops are already tapping at your shoulders like impatient fingers. Inside, it's dry and dim and thick with the scent of smoke and wet fur. You've arrived in what may be the coziest shelter so far, a single central hearth, walls lined with quilts, and, yes, a truly overwhelming number of cats. Not just a handful, not even a dozen. You count at least 20 before your brain gives up and simply accepts that every shadow is probably feline. They lounge on shelves, on rafters, on ledges no human could comfortably reach. One sleeps inside a woven basket of socks. Another is perched inside a cooking pot hung on the wall empty. You hope. The innkeeper, a woman in her 60s with wispy silver hair and a voice like falling fabric, greets you with a dry towel and a plate of sesame cakes. Come to dry off her count. Cats? She asks with a wink. You laugh and tell her maybe both, over tea. She tells you her grandmother once ran the inn, and her grandmother before that. The cats, always part of the place. Some say it's the warmth, she says, motioning toward the roaring hearth. But I think they remember. Remember what? She smiles without answering, and the topic drifts into other stories, like the one about the blind traveler who came through in winter. Cat did not buy a dog, but by a large gray tomcat who walked 5 paces ahead and stopped at every turn until the man caught up. He said it was like the cat knew the map in his head, or the tale of the 2 rival merchants who got snowed in here for 10 days. And refused to speak to each other until a cat climbed onto their shared bench and sneezed directly into both their bowls. They laughed, the silence broke, and the feud ended. You could dismiss these as cozy legends, inflated by decades of retelling. But something about this place, with its soft lighting and sleeping fur and rain drumming on the roof, makes you want to believe. Historians still argue whether these isolated inns acted as consistent cultural hubs or more as temporary refuges passing moments in a longer journey. But the stories suggest something deeper. These places weren't just rest stops. They were vessels of emotional memory, of shared quietness. And the cats, they became the keepers of those memories. As night falls, you find your room tucked beneath the eaves, with low wooden beams and a bed layered in wool. The storm outside deepens, wind moaning like an old flute through the stones. A cat is already on the bed, a black one with a white streak like lightning across its face. It doesn't move when you enter, doesn't flinch when you sit. You lie down slowly. The room grows warmer, softer. You can hear the storm outside and the faint shifting of paws in the hall, but none of it touches you. The cat lifts its head once, listens, then rests again. You're not sure when you fall asleep, only that, when you do, it feels like the exhales with you and the cats. All of them settle into their strange, sacred night watch once again. You wake in near darkness, just a sliver of light creeping beneath the door. For a moment, you don't know where you are until you feel the slight warmth of fur pressed against your shoulder, and the rhythmic purring like a slow drumbeat guiding you back to yourself. The black cat is still there, awake now, watching. You blink. It blinks back. Then, without ceremony, it stands, stretches, hops off the bed, and pads out the door. Tail flicking like punctuation. You rise, joints cracking softly, and gather your things. Outside the inn, the world has turned silver. Overnight, the rain gave way to snow, not a blizzard, not chaos, just a soft blanket covering the hills like the land pulled its own quilt tight. The air smells clean, cold, sacred. Your boots crunch softly as you descend a winding trail flanked by skeletal trees and frost-covered grass. Along the way, you pass stone markers etched with prayers, offerings tucked into cracks, bits of cloth, dried fruit, faded coins, and on one of the markers, paw print. Not scratched or drawn, just stamped, maybe in soot, maybe in time. You reach a valley where the road forks. A wooden signpost leans like it's tired of giving directions. There's no one around, nothing to guide you except, of course, a cat. You don't even question it anymore. It sits in the middle of the left-hand path, tail curled neatly, looking at you like, well, you follow. The path winds through frost-bitten groves and old irrigation channels. It eventually leads to another, and this one smaller, simpler. Just a square building with faded red paint and a crooked chimney. Inside, it smells like barley soup, firewood, and predictably cats. But here, they're quiet, even more than usual. The innkeeper, a wearied man with one eye and a kind voice, welcomes you without fanfare. He gestures toward a low bench by the fire. Long way still ahead. You'll want to warm up. You settle beside the flames. A cat with brindle fur climbs up beside you, presses its flank against your thigh, and begins grooming its paw like it's preparing for something ceremonial. The innkeeper pours tea. It smells faintly of ginger and something bitter you can't name. You're on the edge now, he says. Past here, the roads aren't just trade routes anymore. They're stories, memory paths. Walk more by the past than by the present. You glance out the window. The snow is falling again, so fine and slow it looks like time pausing. He continues. There's a shrine not far from here. People bring offerings, some for the road, some for those who didn't finish it. You ask what kind of offerings. He shrugs. Letters, coins, dried fish. Cats like the fish. Later that afternoon, you hike the short trail to the shrine. It's nothing extravagant, just a carved stone slab beneath an overhanging tree. Its branches beaded with frozen droplets. Offerings lie around it, half buried in snow. A scarf, a child's toy, a worn notebook. And there, curled in the roots of the tree, a sleeping cat. It doesn't move when you approach, just opens one eye slowly, as if to say yes. We remember all of it. Then it closes the eye again and resumes its slumber. Historians still argue whether the cats that congregated near old shrines and crossroads were fed intentionally or simply found warmth in the same places humans turn to for comfort. But in many oral traditions, especially further east, cats were seen as threshold creatures, beings that moved between worlds without asking permission. Back at the inn you dine with a few other travelers, quiet types. No one asks where anyone's going. The cat on the hearth flicks its tail every time someone speaks, like it's editing the conversation. The innkeeper plays a reed flute later, soft and slow, and the music seems to wrap the cats in a hush. One by one, they curl into corners, purring their way towards sleep. You go to bed early. Your room is small but warm. A little bowl of salt sits by the window. You're told it's for luck. A cat hops onto your bed just as you pull the blanket over your shoulders. It spins twice, kneads the blanket, then curls at your feet like a final punctuation mark. You sleep like a stone dropped in snow. By the time you wake, the snow has stopped entirely, leaving the world wrapped in that pale, quiet glow that comes only after a long, slow storm. The inn feels like a dream you haven't quite left, every edge softened, every sound cushioned. Even the cats move slower here, as if time itself has grown heavy with sleep. You stretch, sit up, and find the brindle cat from last night still in your room. It's perched on the windowsill, watching something beyond the frost-laced glass. You follow its gaze, but there's nothing there, just light, stillness, and the long shadow of a cypress tree that wasn't there the day before. You don't ask questions anymore. You just pack, nod to the cat, and step out into the clean, chilled air. The road narrows as it twists along a ridge, the terrain becoming unfamiliar again, harder to track, more ancient in feeling. These paths, you've heard, were once walked not just by merchants and monks, but by the earliest pilgrims and outcasts, people moving not for profit, but for something heavier. And even here, maybe especially here, there were cats. You reach a stone waymarker carved with the shape of a paw. Below it, someone has laid a bowl of rice, still warm. There's no sign of the giver, but next to the bowl, you spot for tiny paw prints, snowy depressions, spaced like ellipses, like someone came, paused, and then moved on. Further down the path, you find what looks like a former observatory or weather station long abandoned. The outer wall has partially collapsed, revealing what was once a circular chamber within. Open roof dot inside, tucked behind what remains of a sundial, is a small cat shelter, weatherproof with scrap metal and lined with hay. Two cats doze there, completely uninterested in your presence. You sit on a stone ledge, rest your feet, and snack on a handful of candied almonds you forgot you had. The building, according to a scratched plaque half covered in moss, once monitored wind patterns along the trade routes. Traders would stop here to learn whether the path ahead was safe from dust storms. And the cats, they were the real barometers. One particularly old traveler's diary you recall from an inn back west had a curious note. When the cats at Windhouse are hiding, wait a day. When they play on the wall, the road is kind. Historians still argue whether such observations were just coincidences, or whether cats truly responded to barometric pressure and environmental shifts in ways that helped traders predict danger. But even now, you can't shake the feeling that the two cats here, curled up but alert, eyes slightly open, know something about the weather. You don single quotes. The wind picks up in the afternoon, cutting through your layers. As you press onward, you encounter another caravan, 3 camels, 2 people, and 1 cat. It rides in a cloth sling across a woman's chest, paws poking out, head half tucked inside. It doesn't like wind, she explains. Says it hurts its ears. You don't question how she knows this. The group invites you to share tea at their next stop, and you accept. They set up camp near a red rock overhang shaped like a bowl, which traps the last of the sunlight and makes the wind pause out of respect. The cat, now released from its sling, prances around the camels like a self-appointed border patrol agent. Occasionally it stops to roll in the dust, then stares at the sky like it's expecting a message from the clouds. One of the traders, an older man with weathered cheeks and gold-threaded cuffs, tells you about the listening cats once kept at certain desert border posts. They didn't meow, he says. They just watched. If you arrived and they followed you inside, it meant you'd be safe. If they stayed outside, wait until morning. He sips his tea. They never explain how they knew, and we never asked. That evening, you and the caravan bed down beneath thick wool blankets, bellies full of stewed chickpeas and roasted dates. The cat picks a sleeping mat at random yours and curls up beside your ribs, tail flicking once before stilling. The wind is gone. The air is calm, and in the space between silence and breath, you can almost hear the purring of every cat that has ever wandered these roads. A low hum pass from whisker to whisker, paw to paw, memory to memory. You close your eyes and follow that sound home. Dawn comes like spilled milk, pale, cold, and creeping across the ground in slow rivulets of light. You sit up with a grunt, brushing dust from your hair and blinking into the morning haze. The cat is gone again. Of course, it always is. But a few soft paw prints linger on your blanket like a goodbye note written in punctuation marks. The caravan is already packing up. One of the camels groans as a bundle is slung over its side, and the cat not far off is stretching in a beam of sunlight, toes splayed like starfish. You thank your hosts, trade a dried fig for a scrap of bread, and take the road alone once more. The terrain ahead flattens out briefly into what used to be called a merchant's plain, an open stretch where caravans could fan out, scout routes, and let animals graze without the risk of ambush or rockfalls. The sun, finally awake, throws long, golden arms across the ground. You can almost feel it urging you onward. You pass a dry creek bed and spot something odd perched on a rock. A cat, sitting perfectly still, tail curled over its front paws like a seal. It's watching something in the far distance, something you can't see. You look that way, nothing, but still, you trust it. You pause to rest at a roadside shade tent, pitched hastily by a family of weavers. They've got looms strung between stakes and their goods spread on rugs, thick wool cloaks, indigo-dyed shawls, silk-threaded mittens. Beneath one of the looms sits a calico cat the size of a toddler. Rolled into a sphere of sleep, she guards. The dyes, says one of the women, as if that's a normal job title. You blink. From what? She shrugs, spills, bugs, unhappy hands. There's a small bowl of crushed mint leaves beside the loom, and you watch as another kitten sniffs it, sneezes, and promptly tries to bury it under a scrap of cloth. That one's still learning, the woman adds. Historians still argue whether cats were ever deliberately trained in any formal sense. Along the silk routes, some scholars point to textual references describing cats in temples with the calm of monks, implying some level of domesticated training. Others believe cats simply observed human patterns long enough to fake it convincingly. You're inclined to agree with the latter. At midday, you reach an old inspection station, a crumbling watchtower, surrounded by low walls and sunken storage pits. The place has long since been abandoned by humans, but not by its feline residents. A carved sign hangs above the entrance, bleached nearly white, silence, inspection in progress. But the only inspections happening now are of you by a row of cats, lounging on the half-collapsed windowsill. You step inside. Cobwebs hang like forgotten curtains, and the floor crunches beneath your boots. A few sacks salt, floured still, lie in one corner, brittle with age, and near the back wall is a small wooden platform, probably once used for issuing travel permits or counting goods. Now it's a throne. A long-haired cat sits there, like it's inherited the job and is still waiting for the next paperwork to arrive. You sit on a crate and pull out a heel of bread, offering a tiny crumb to the nearest cat. It declines politely by blinking, then licking its paw as if to say, "Do I look like I eat table scraps?" You munch slowly, watching the way they move through the ruins like they remember when it was full, like they still wait for the bustle to return, or maybe they just enjoy the silence. You think back to something you heard days ago. Cats don't need people. They just enjoy the memory of them by dusk. You reach a wine-sheltered cleft in the hills, nestled between two outcrops, barely visible from the road. Is a low-slung shelter, a kind of traveler's cave built of stacked stones and reinforced with logs. The entryway has been etched with symbols, old, smoothed over, but familiar. One of them looks unmistakably like a curled cat. Inside is warm, dusty, and already inhabited by 3 cats. They don't acknowledge you at first. Just stretch, yawn, and continue with the important work of being asleep. You lay your pack down gently, light a small fire, boil some water, eat from a packet of rice and dried vegetables that somehow still has flavor. And when the sun finally drops below the hills, the cats begin to stir, not wildly, but in that lazy, unfurling way that suggests nightfall is a kind of changing of the guard. You feel safe here. You feel watched, but not judged. You feel, for the first time in a while, like the road has accepted you. You roll out your mat, tug your blanket close, and lie back against the curve of stone. One of the cats climbs onto your belly. Another curls against your ankle. The third settles just near your head, like punctuation to a sentence you didn't know you'd written. Outside, the wind howls. Inside, you breathe, and the cats keep watch. You wake to absolute stillness, not the kind that feels empty, but the kind that hums like the world has taken a breath and is holding it just for you. The cave shelter is dim and warm. The fire has gone out, but faint heat still radiates from the stones. All 3 cats are gone, though you find a small offering beside your roll blanket, a single, perfect whisker. You don't question it. Stepping outside, you're greeted by a sunrise painted in liquid gold. The hills around you look gentler now, as if the land itself is starting to ease its grip. You stretch, repack your things, and start walking before you can talk yourself into lingering. The path twists downward through a narrow ravine, past dry streams and the odd thorn bush. Midway through the descent, you spot a ring of stones off the trail, carefully ranged, clearly intentional. In the center lies a small figurine carved from bone. A cat, tail curled forward, eyes half-lidded, and a look you've come to recognize as either smug wisdom or casual sleepiness. Maybe both. You wonder who left it here. You wonder how long ago. Further along, the path widens and flattens, revealing a small village, a quiet one. Mostly mud brick structures and gently sloping rooftops. A flock of goats bleats somewhere out of view, and an old man sweeps dust from his doorstep with a brush that looks more ceremonial than practical. You nod at him. He nods back, then points to a cat. It's white, except for a black stripe down its back. It's standing in the middle of the road, clearly waiting for you. You sigh. Of course. The cat leads you slowly, lazily, with multiple breaks to sniff flowers or judge you silently to a sunken garden near the edge of town. There, under a shady tree, sits one of the oldest inns still operating on this stretch of the route. Low ceilings, wide doorways, and a pair of ancient stone lions flanking the entrance. On top of one of those lions, a tabby cat sunbathing like royalty. You enter and are greeted by the innkeeper, a tall woman in a deep red shawl who doesn't ask your name or destination. She simply says, "You've come far," and gestures to a cushion by the central hearth. It's the kind of place where the floor creaks on purpose, the soup simmers constantly, and the cats are not so much guests as part of the architecture. One sleeps in a drawer left permanently ajar. Another watches you from atop a beam, tail dangling like a pendulum dot as you eat a dish of barley, lentils, and something that might be date or onion. You overhear the traders in quiet conversation. They say this place was once a monk's retreat. Monks don't usually keep cats. These ones did. Said cats understood stillness better than any novice. Historians still argue whether monasteries along the Silk routes commonly kept cats, or whether those that did were exceptions, born of practicality. Rats, after all, are equal opportunity invaders. But in places like this where peace was as much the goal as protection, the presence of cats took on more than just functional value. They became cohabitants in silence. After the meal, you take a walk through the garden behind the inn. Narrow paths curve between gnarled fig trees and herb beds still wet with dew. Cats lounge everywhere, on warm stones and flower pots. One even sits balanced atop a narrow archway, legs dangling like it's dangling its thoughts. You sit beneath a tree with a bowl of tea and watch the cats watching the world. A young girl, maybe 6 years old, appears beside you with a wooden puzzle in her hands. It's shaped like a cat, each piece painted a different color. She holds it up, serious as a philosopher. Want to see the trick? You nod. She disassembles it, slowly, carefully, and then rebuilds it backward. The tail becomes the head becomes the tail. The cat still fits together, but now it's walking the other way. She beams. See, doesn't matter which way it goes. It still fits. You blink, momentarily stunned by how much that feels like a metaphor for your entire journey. The girl skips away, and you finish your tea in contemplative silence. That evening, as the inn quiets, you head to your room. The door creaks open to reveal a bed already occupied by a single long-haired cat sprawled in the exact center. You set down your pack. Wait. The cat doesn't move. You sit on the edge of the bed, unsure whether to ask it to scoot or just sleep. On the floor. Eventually, the cat sighs audibly and relocates to inches to the left. Permission granted. You lie down, blanket pulled to your chin, and stare at the wooden ceiling beams overhead. Outside, a night breeze stirs the fig leaves. Somewhere below, someone laughs. A quiet, brief sound. The cat presses against your side, warm, heavy, grounding, and you sleep not because you are tired, but because the world says it's safe now, because the cat says so. When you wake, it's still dark, not night dark, just the velvety blue hush of pre-dawn. When even the wind seems reluctant to stir, you blink slowly. The room still wrapped in the scent of wood and warmth. The cat is gone again, as usual. You think maybe that's its trick, always there when you need it, never there when you try to hold on. You rise, dress quietly, and slip out into the corridor, where the lanterns are dim but still flickering. Somewhere, water is boiling. Someone else is awake too, perhaps chasing a restless thought or rising for prayer. Outside, the garden glows in starlight. Cats prowl between herbs and sleeping vines, their eyes flashing briefly before vanishing into the underbrush. You walk among them like a guest who overstayed the party but still gets offered dessert. The last stretch of your journey begins here. You leave the inn just as the sky begins to bleed pale orange across the horizon. The road south dips into a fertile basin filled with wheat fields and long rows of date palms. The air feels different now, less wild, more worn, like the passage of time has softened the path through generations of feet, hooves, and paws, and yet still the cats. On a stone wall, one sleeps curled atop a basket of turnips. Another perches on a spice vendor's scale, tail flicking with each breeze. You pass a potter's stall, where 3 kittens tumble in a mound of drying clay like it's a playground. You smile. You don't know when it happened, but this isn't surprising anymore. It's expected. Natural. At a riverside rest stop, you Watch a woman rinse vegetables in cool water while a gray cat perches on her shoulder. Completely unbothered by the motion or the splashes, she sees you watching and grins. First time seeing a shoulder cat, you shake your head. 50th, she nods sagely. Then you're ready. Ready for what? She doesn't say. She just keeps scrubbing carrots. You sit for a while, eating a date stuffed with almond paste, sipping tepid water from a gourd. A breeze carries the scent of saffron and warm dust. A group of traders pass by, their caravan strung out on a graceful line. Like a moving necklace across the valley, you spot another kid riding in a saddlebag. Head peeking out, it yawns as it passes, as if unimpressed by the scale of its journey. Historians still argue whether cats had any official status among caravan groups, if they were listed among inventories or treated like mascots. But it's clear from surviving trade logs that cats weren't just tolerated, they were anticipated. Sometimes even requested. In one merchant's record from centuries ago, there's a line buried between inventory notes in Khan's favor. One ginger Mauser to be secured before departure. Cats weren't afterthoughts. They were part of the deal. As the day wears on, you come upon a series of old step wells deep, echoing stairways carved into the ground, designed to collect and store water in dry seasons. You descend one, curious, and find the air grows noticeably cooler with each level. At the bottom, beside the still, dark pool, sits a cat. It looks up, blinks slowly, then closes its eyes again. You sit beside it in silence. The stillness here is different, not the quiet of absence, but the kind full of presence. You get the feeling that if you spoke, even your thoughts would shush you. Eventually, you climb back up, the sun now high and casting strong shadows across the stone. You reach the next town by mid-afternoon. It's larger than the last, with red-tiled roofs, clustered market stalls, and the kind of baked sugar scent that tells you someone is roasting nuts nearby. And on every corner, every ledge, every windowsill-cats.u. Check into a local and nestle beside a tea shop. The place has no sign, just a carved wooden cat above the door. You don't need more than that now. The innkeeper greets you with a nod and a cup of something bitter, but oddly calming. You're almost there, she says. You blink. They're where? She shrugs. Wherever the road's been leading you. You'll know when you stop walking. Later that night, as you lie on a firm cot beneath a woven blanket, a single cat appears at your door. It doesn't enter, just stands there, tail straight, eyes glowing faintly. And you realize this cat has been following you for days, maybe longer. The markings are familiar, the expression unmistakable. You rise slowly, cross the room, and crouch down to its level. It leans forward, headbutts your knee, then walks away. You don't follow. You don't need to. It'll be waiting tomorrow. The next morning, you wake not to silence or cats, but to birdsong. Actual birdsong, lilting, messy, a little too loud, and completely out of place after so many mornings of quiet fur and gentle purring. For a moment, you feel mildly betrayed, but as you rise, you realize something else has shifted. The weight in your chest has lessened. Your body no longer aches from the road, and your mind isn't crowded with what comes next. You're just here. The air smells like warm flour and cardamom. Outside, you hear the scrape of a broom and the laugh of a child. The world has tilted toward life again. After breakfast, flatbread brushed with ghee and sprinkled with sesame, you shoulder your pack and take to the road once more, though your pace is slower now, measured, almost reluctant. You pass beneath canopies of fig trees, through olive groves buzzing with insects, and into a final stretch of countryside that feels neither ancient nor new, just alive. As you round a bend, the landscape opens up into a sprawling valley speckled with distant towns, grazing herds, and the shimmer of a long river curling lazily through it all. The road here is wider, well-traveled, smoothed by centuries of boots, wheels, and paws. And waiting just ahead, on a small outcropping of rock, is a cat, the same one, you think. Or maybe not. It doesn't matter. It stands, tail upright, and walks ahead of you, not quickly, not demanding, just leading. You follow. You reach what must be the last inn. Before the sea, a great square courtyard surrounded by whitewashed walls and draped fabric. It smells of salt, citrus, and warm stone. The building itself hums with life. Families arriving, traders bartering, donkeys braying, music wafting from some unknown corner. But among all this bustle, cats, of course, on cushions, in windows, beneath chairs. One even naps in the luggage cart, utterly undisturbed. You're offered a room and a plate of saffron rice before you even ask. Someone waves you toward the garden. Someone else places a cat in your lap like a ritual offering. This time, the cat stays. You sit in the shade of a lemon tree and look out across the inn's boundary wall, where the sea begins to glitter faintly. Beyond the last ridge, ships are docked down there, or waiting, or dreaming. You're not sure which. You think of everything behind you: fortresses and firelight, barley stew and paw prints in snow, shoulder cats and shrine guardians. You wonder how many of them were real, how many imagined, and then you realize it doesn't matter. Cats don't keep score. They keep presence. The cat in your lap purrs once loud, steady, final. A punctuation mark to your long walk, and then it curls up, wraps its tail over its nose, and sleeps. So do you. The road quiets behind you now. No more boots to lace, no more maps to unfold. The last inn stands silent in your memory, wrapped in orange light and the distant scent of tea and sleep. The cats, hundreds of them, maybe more, drift back through your thoughts like petals on a breeze, one stretching on a rooftop, another blinking slowly from a market stall, a kitten nestled in your scarf. Their presence softens the sharp edges of history, makes the centuries hum with something gentler. You remember their warmth, their patience, how they guarded you without guarding, how they listened with eyes half closed, as if your story was one they'd heard before but still liked the ending. And now, the journey curls inward. The night wraps around your shoulders like a wool cloak, heavy with the peace of places you no longer need to reach. The wind hushes. The stars blink slower. Your breath eases. Your heartbeat softens. The last cat, who may be the first, or all of them at once, settles near your ribs and lets out one final, long purr. That sound, low and even, rocks your thoughts like a cradle, pulling them downward, deeper, stiller. There's nothing left to walk toward, only sleep, only now, only here. Good night.